So if you guys look at my basically community tabs, which I use to basically inform people, make polls, etc. I plan on doing Alexander's Conquest series, followed by the Diadochi Wars by Kings and Generals. But I'm kind of on a huge, since last year, I've been really obsessed with the Greeks and like Greek culture and like history. And I took a class last semester for my university about, you know, mythology, and we read Ovid's Metamorphoses, and which is, about the Roman slash Greek pantheon. So like I said, I'm really obsessed with the Greeks right now. And so this has kind of been the series that I've been most wanting to do since last year. And I'm really gonna just try to savor it. Before we actually get to Alexander himself, we're gonna be watching a series of videos leading up to that series. I decided to start here in ancient Macedonia before Alexander and Philip. Then I'm gonna watch the two videos about Philip of Macedon, and then watch these other videos about, the armies and battle tactics of Philip and Alexander, and then jump. So overall, that's like about 8 videos in the next 8 days starting now, before we jump to Alexander. Like I said, this has kind of really been the series that I've been most looking forward to, that I've just been wanting to get. I was planning on saving it later this year, but I'm losing patience and I just really want to get to it. So yeah, so we're going to be learning about ancient Macedonia before Alexander the Great and Philip II. From what I've heard, at least from what little research I've done, is that Macedonia was considered somewhat barbaric, somewhat of a backwater in ancient Greece. And I do know that Philip of Macedon rises. He basically makes Macedonia the power of the Greek world. Basically creates a hegemony, right? The beginning of Macedonian hegemony over all of Greece. I believe he also broke, I believe it was the Thebans before Macedon rose. I know there was Spartan hegemony, and then the Spartans were beaten by the Thebans, the Sacred Band of Thebes, and I believe Thebes was the power before Macedon. I could be wrong, there's probably a crapload I'm missing, but I think that's how it went. And then, Philip basically turned Macedonia from this backwater-ish area in the Greek world into the power. As we know, Macedonia will unite Greece, and Greece will go on to eat up Persia, and then, Greece will basically be the power of the world, at least until the Romans show up. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. That's kind of what little I know. And yeah, we should probably get to it. I'm really looking forward to seeing if anything I got was correct or completely wrong. I guess I'll find out right now. With that said, let's get to it, shall we?
To truly understand how any great empire came to power, we must explore its oldest roots. This is especially true when it comes to Macedonia, the birthplace of the legendary King Philip II and his son Alexander the Great, a man who needs no introduction. Long before there was an empire that spanned across 3 continents, there was a tiny kingdom on the very edge of the Greek world, whose humble beginnings made possible the great conquests we all know today. Welcome to our video on the history of ancient Macedonia. Shout out to one of our most cherished partners, Magellan. According to the historian Nicholas Hammond, the earliest ancestors of the Macedonians emerged as semi-nomadic shepherds in the Erastian highlands during the late Bronze Age. These seasonal pastoralists were not part of the Greek world, which at the time was dominated by the Mycenaean palace culture of the southern Peloponnese. This is evidenced by their absence in the works of Homer, whose epics were a fantastical retelling of this ancient era. In Book 2 of the Iliad, the iconic poet compiles an extensive list of the contingent of allied Greeks sailing to Troy, a list that stops just south of the traditional territory of Macedon. The Macedonians only emerged in Greek records well after the Bronze Age collapse, after the warlike Dorian subgroup of the Greeks invaded the peninsula, significantly changing the ethnic makeup of the land. It is possible that the Macedonians were a Dorian tribe, which would explain their appearance in the historical records during these tumultuous migrations. It was Herodotus, the ancient father of history, who transcribed the story of how the Kingdom of Macedonia was founded. According to him, the tale begins in the city-state of Argos, where there lived 3 brothers, Gauenes, Eripas, and Perdiccas. The brothers were descendants of Temerus, a legendary Dorian Greek warrior, who himself was a descendant of the great Heracles. Sometime in the early 6th century BC, the brothers were exiled from their home in Argos and made their way north to the Orestian highlands, where the barbaric Macedonians dwelled, divided into primitive pastoralist tribes. The siblings found work as shepherds for a local petty chieftain, but this did not last for long. The chieftain noticed that the bread his wife was making for Perdiccas, the eldest of the siblings, always swelled to twice the size of everyone else's bread during their communal meals. Interpreting this as a sign that Perdiccas was destined for greatness, and therefore was a threat to his reign, the chieftain ordered all 3 brothers to leave his lands. Perdiccas remarked that he should at least be paid for the shepherding work he had done, but the king refused, instead snidely offering him a patch of sunlight shining through their stable's smoke hole. Rather than showing outrage, Perdiccas calmly accepted the payment offered, using his knife to draw a circle around the sun patch, claiming it for his own before leaving. The king was bewildered.
I do think the Macedonian like symbol right at the time was the sun with the wait let me Google it. Okay, yeah, it's the sun, so that's interesting. You know, I also heard that when I'm looking up Macedonia, a while back ago, when I was looking at like maps of modern Europe, like, you know, and I was kind of looking up things about Macedon itself, which in Europe, Macedon is its own thing separated from Greece, the nation of Greece, and you know, some people are like, the Macedonians are in Greek. A few times I've seen people claim that the Macedonians are in Greek, or that people debated if even Alexander qualified as a Greek. Some people say, of course they were Greek, you know, they participated in the Olympics. And then other people are like, no, they weren't Greek. And then I'm like, so what are the qualifications of being Greek? I know the Greeks were really independent and separated, but I'm like, I don't know. It's interesting that there's even debate among that, you know? So yeah, that's just something that came to mind right now.
Bewildered until one of his priests informed him that this was an ill omen from the gods. Enraged, the petty despot sent horsemen out to kill the brothers, but Perdiccas and his siblings managed to evade death by jumping into the Halicmon River and letting the currents carry them away. They soon came upon the gardens of Midas, a vibrant rose field at the base of Mount Bermion. From there, the 3 brothers made a new home, and eventually garnered enough support to unite or conquer all the disparate Macedonian tribes. Perdiccas ascended as the first king of a united Macedonian people, while the sunlight he had claimed from the petty king became the emblem of his royal house, the Vergina sun. Perdiccas and his followers then migrated eastwards out of the Orestian highlands and into the Amathian plain. There they set up a centre of power in a settlement called Aigai. By the 6th century BC, the Macedonians had established control over a strip of land from Bottiaea to the Aegean coast, driving out the Thracian tribes who had lived there previously. It was here they settled and made their kingdom. Whether or not this story has any truth to it is unknown, but Herodotus claims that it is the tale that the Macedonians of his time, some 200 years after the legend, claimed was the genesis of their kingdom. Perdiccas' dynasty would become known as the Argeads, named after their ancestral homeland of Argos. It would be their bloodline that would rule Macedonia in an uninterrupted succession right up until Alexander the Great and his son. It is here that we should take a brief tangent to explore the culture of the Macedonians under the Argead dynasty, particularly in the context of how it was perceived by the Greek cities to their south. Kings of Macedon certainly had a place in the Greek world. In the late 5th century BC, one member of the Argead royal family named Alexander, no, not that one, sought to participate in the Olympic Games, an event open only to Greeks. Many protested that Alexander was not a Greek and therefore could not enter the sacred competition.
That's what I was getting at, right? The whole only Greece can do this and whatnot, and there being debate around the Macedonians. It's so weird seeing that Alexander the Great, the one that I would say everyone knows about, like normal people might have heard about him. He's technically the third, but like no one ever calls him the third, right? I don't know, that's just funny. Even like Philip, the most famous Philip, right? He's only the second, so I don't know. I just find that very interesting. And that the origin story he gave there at the beginning, compared to other nations' origin stories, that one sounds incredibly plausible. Like, is it me? Like, I was kind of like reading about like dynasties of, ancient Egypt and Japan, and like their kind of first emperor stories, or very mythologized, like with the gods appearing, it's mythologized. So with the Macedonians right there, it's odd in how plausible it sounds. Just three brothers migrate, form a little group, and then just take everyone. Like, it just sounds like it could legit happen. And it's not too far removed. That story was only 200. Like, I'm thinking here in America, we're only a few hundred years old. Like, America's still kind of young in that sense, We're not even, like, close to 1,000 as a nation, So, yeah, it's just interesting how, I guess back then, recording history, obviously much different than here, and as time evolved, we got better recording history, but I don't know. I just find it just sounds incredibly plausible. Like, yeah, that could just happen. Like, I could buy that,
But the Hellenodikai, the Olympic judges, ruled that by virtue of Alexander's ancestral ties to Argos, that the Macedonian had the right to compete. According to Herodotus, Alexander entered the foot race and won equal
I'm done spending an obscene amount of money on takeout every week.
First. And yet, despite their ruling family's undeniable link to the Hellenic world, the common people of Macedonia were still inherently alien to the traditionally xenophobic Greeks. Herodotus himself refers to Macedonia not as a Greek kingdom, but as a kingdom of Macedonians ruled over by Greeks. The historian Thucydides.
That's interesting. Like I said, I mentioned earlier that there's been debate whether they were Greek or not, so it's kind of cool that he's bringing that up. And the perspective of the ancient Greeks looking at them being like, they're not Greek, but like, I don't know. That's just very interesting, I find, personally. Like, that whole debate, even people to this day are like, are the Macedonians Greek, I don't know, what do you guys think? Are the Macedonians Greek or not? I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Who chronicled the Peloponnesian War, recalls three main groups fighting in that denominative conflict. The Greeks, who constituted the main belligerents of Athens and Sparta, the Illyrian barbarians, and the Macedonians, who he considered to be neither fully Greek nor fully barbarian. The state of semi-Hellenic limbo the Macedonians lived in was a product of their way of life, which to the Greeks seemed both recognizable and horridly strange at the same time. The Macedonians were a predominantly rural, village-dwelling people, as opposed to the Greeks, who considered their urban polis-based way of life the hallmark of civilization. Hunting was a huge aspect of highland living, and the Macedonians delighted in chasing dangerous game like boars and even lions. Successful hunts were celebrated with banquets, where the Macedonians reveled heartily and drank undiluted wine. This horrified.
Can you guys remember when we were watching back on my birthday, back in February 13th, I posted the video about where we watched, you know, how Rome conquered Greece, and like Antiochus the Third, when he was trying to win over the Greeks, was like trying to make marriage alliances, and during one of his weddings, he drank undiluted wine, which like shocked the Greeks. And I don't know why, I just find that such a funny thing, like that kind of small difference. Nowadays it's like, who cares? But like back then, obviously things had much different meanings and whatnot, you know. And yeah, so far it's cool to see, because I had heard that, like, yeah, in Alexander's speech, when his soldiers went on mutiny, he mentioned how his father Philip, I can't quote it directly, but he mentioned he took them from, you know, pasturing lambs to being, you know, the world superpower. So yeah, the Macedonian sheep herders, very rural, outdoorsy, you know, not as well, we imagine the Greeks with the temples and whatnot. So yeah, they seemed, I guess in that sense, a little less advanced, you know, in terms of just, I mean, obviously it's just a different way of living, but like, you know, advanced in that the architecture and some of their practices were in like all the rest of the Greeks. So I guess that helped them distinguish them, which, I don't know. I just find that so interesting. And yeah, the Greeks being xenophobic, that's another interesting thing, because, you know, when Alexander was going around conquering the world, you know, being crowned Pharaoh of Egypt and trying to basically be everything for everyone and kind of get everyone united and culture mix, I believe he got some flack for that by his fellow Macedonians, because they're like, oh, why are you like trying to like look like them? Why are you dressing like the Persians? Like, you know, like obviously like you shouldn't like you shouldn't change the way you are or adopt something else. Like obviously xenophobic. Yeah, I just find that very interesting, you know.
Their southern guests, who saw such a practice as an utter lack of self-control and good taste. Furthermore, the Macedonians lived under the rule of a king. This was unfathomable to the Greeks, particularly the Athenians, who prided themselves on their public assemblies, councils, and elected magistrates.
Okay, that is just interesting. We know Sparta had kings. Dude, I'm so happy that I looked at the Constitution of Sparta and Athens videos by Historia Civilis. But, yeah, Sparta had 2 kings. You know, but obviously in terms of actual, they're not kings in the way we think of them with absolute power to do anything. Like, kings could be overruled and whatnot. So, I guess that's different, but I don't know, I always assumed that most of the Greek city-states had their own kind of king or ruler, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know about Thebes, like, what the government looks like that, but apparently, that's interesting that Macedon stood out by having a king. Like, that only makes me wonder, what do all the rest of the city-states have? I mean, we know Sparta and Athens, but yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that they only had... Wow, huh. I'm loving this video, by the way. I'm like so invested in Greek culture, guys. I actually really want to go to Greece. Like, I'm actually really... I'm kind of becoming a huge Greek fanboy at the moment. Like I said, since last year, so yeah.
In their eyes, no Greek could ever live under a monarchy, so the Macedonians could not be Greeks. With that said, the religious rites practiced in the north would have been comfortably familiar to an Athenian. The Macedonians worshipped more or less the same gods in the same ways as their southern neighbours. They were particularly reverent of Zeus and his son Heracles, who they believed was the ancient ancestor of their royal Argead line. The Macedonian language remains an enigma to us. The Argead kings performed their courtly functions in Attic, a prestigious Athenian dialect of Greek. As a result, the native Macedonian tongue spoken by the common people is scarcely attested to. Through footnotes in literary sources, ancient coins, and a handful of inscriptions, we have a scant 200 or so words of the Macedonian language. Most of these words have Greek roots, but some are of Illyrian and Thracian origin. Ultimately, ancient Macedonian was probably a highly divergent dialect of ancient Greek, a tongue that would have sounded vaguely familiar yet distorted and strange to the average Athenian or Spartan. With all that said, the peoples outside of the Greek world rarely made any distinction between Macedonians and Greeks, who they generally saw as two branches of the same people. The Persians in particular referred to the Greeks as Ionas, meaning Ionians, and to the Macedonians as Iona Sakabara, meaning Ionians with hats that look like shields. It would in fact be the Persians
I love that little distinction, that's kind of cute.
who would indirectly launch the Argead monarchs into political relevancy, a convenient segue we will use to jump back into the history of the Macedonian kingdom. In 510 BC, the great king of kings himself, Darius I, led a campaign to subdue the Scythian tribes in the central Balkans. This failed, and Darius returned home, leaving his top general Megasabus in charge of subjugating the Paeonians and other tribes along the Strymon River. From here, the ancient sources tend to contradict one another, but the most reliable tale relates that Amnitus I, the reigning king of Macedonia, sought to spare his realm from the ravages of war that the Persians brought to his doorstep. To do so, he presented earth and water to the Persian authority, submitting his realm as a vassal of the Achaemenid Empire. 3 decades later, a new king of kings had arisen to the throne in Babylon. Xerxes was determined to resume his father's European campaigns, and so prepared a force to invade the Greek mainland. At this time, the reigning Argead king was Alexander I, the same man who had competed in the Olympics some years earlier. Alexander was a shrewd and unscrupulous ruler, determined to come out on top whatever the outcome of the war. Nevertheless, he was formally an obedient vassal to the Persian king, so he mustered a force of cavalrymen and joined Xerxes' army as it marched southwards.
Yeah, that is interesting. I had heard, of the Persians, some Greeks siding with them. At one point, Sparta, I believe, sided with the Persians, so yeah, that's just interesting because of the division of the Greeks, some would join, others wouldn't. And perfect divide and conquer. The Romans took advantage of that perfectly. Persia, as we know, they were repelled by the Greeks.
Meanwhile, the allied Greek army had decided to meet their foe at the Peneus River. When informed of this, Alexander sent secret messengers ahead to the Greek encampment, presenting himself as a spy within the Persian army. He advised the Greeks against making their stand there, for Xerxes was taking the long way around west of Olympus, and planned on flanking them from behind, where they would surely be destroyed. Reluctantly, the Greeks heeded the Macedonians' warnings and withdrew. Alexander probably did prevent the Greeks from being slaughtered, while the retreat allowed the Persians to conquer Thessaly without any real resistance. Through diplomatic cunning, the shrewd Macedonian had pleased both sides.
Man, this man's playing chess right now with everyone. He's playing chess, and yeah, you can just kind of see... I love that shrewdness because it just shows how one gets around, right? Especially in this turbulent time in history. Excuse me, but yeah, I like that. The guy's making big moves already,
The following year of the campaign saw Alexander stand with the Persian army commanded by General Mardonius as they faced down a Spartan-led coalition of Greeks at a plain near Plataea. For decades, historians have hotly debated what role the Macedonian king played in the famous battle that followed, but Herodotus tells the following tale. Before the armies clashed, augurs on both sides had performed divinations, and both the Persians and Greeks were told the gods did not favour an attack. However, with his supplies dwindling and Greek reinforcements trickling in day by day, Mardonius decided that despite the gods' warnings, he would attack at dawn. When learning of this, Alexander rode under cover of darkness into the Greek camp, informing their commander, Pausanias of Sparta of the Persian general's intentions. The Greeks were thus able to prevent themselves from being ambushed or outflanked, and thanks to Alexander's warnings, emerged victorious at the Battle of Plataea. Following this last great defeat, the Persian army fled eastwards, abandoning Europe entirely. Through this, Macedon was once more an
Listen, you want to skip this out.
independent kingdom. Historians
That's amazing. The man managed to win independence, please both the Greeks and the Persians, without starting beef with any. And yeah, again, claim independence, and he did that all through shrewd maneuvering. I'm telling you, Alexander the First was playing chess with everyone, and he was doing it spectacularly, you know? And that's just impressive, I think. You know, you can see why Macedon becomes what it does, you know?
both ancient and modern alike have long argued over Alexander's motives during the Persian Wars. However, it seems most likely that he was neither a pan-Hellenist nor a Persian sympathizer. As a vassal to the Achaemenids, he had gladly played the role of the collaborator, helping the massive empire subjugate the warlike tribes on his borders. When the Persians had fulfilled their purpose to him, he helped the Greeks take them down from the inside. The Achaemenid retreat left a power vacuum in the lands surrounding Macedonia, which Alexander used to expand the borders of his kingdom threefold. He had played both sides and come out on top. The next king to ascend after Alexander was Perdiccas.
We love seeing that. We love seeing geniuses at work, man.
II, and it would be under his reign that Macedonia would play a key role in the second of ancient Greece's two most famous conflicts, the Peloponnesian War. In the years leading up to the conflict, Macedonia had been gradually inserting itself into the geopolitical sphere of the Greek world. They had become a friend and ally of Athens, and according to some sources, the legendarily powerful Athenian navy was built using Macedonian timber. This was not to last, as Athens was nothing if not aggressively expansionist. In 437, seeking to seize dominance over the trade coming out of the northern Aegean, the Athenians established the colony of Amphipolis right upon the doorstep of Macedonia. This put the southerners a little too close for comfort for Perdiccas, so when the Spartans, equally incensed by Athenian expansionism, declared war, the Macedonian king brought his realm into the conflict on the side of Sparta. Early on, the Argead monarch foiled an Athenian attempt to convince a Thracian king, Sitalces, to invade his realm, forging a marriage alliance with the latter. This victory was short-lived, as Arrhabaeus, a local ruler in Upper Macedonia, launched himself into open rebellion against his king. Perdiccas marched upon the rebels with the support of his ally, the Spartan general Brasidas, but then, spooked by Arrhabaeus' vast host of fearsome Illyrian allies, he fled with his troops in the night, without even bothering to tell the Spartans, abandoning Brasidas to his fate. Thankfully for the Spartans, Brasidas was able to orchestrate an ingenious retreat, and in revenge, began to pillage the Macedonian countryside. Having now made an enemy of the Spartans, Perdiccas flipped sides and joined the Athenians. It is here the capricious Macedonian king disappears from the historical record, last seen in 414 BC on an expedition with the Athenians to retake Amphipolis, which was then in Spartan hands. Perdiccas was succeeded by his son, Archelaus I, who managed to phase Macedon out of the war. The Athenians had just lost a huge fleet during a disastrous campaign in Syracuse, and were in desperate need of good timber. Archelaus used the leverage he now possessed as a supplier of timber to reassert hegemony over his northern Aegean economic interests, ending the reason Macedonian entered into war in the first place. He was also probably the one who finally ended Arrhabaeus' rebellion. Taking advantage of the hard-won stability in his realm, Archelaus set to overhauling the infrastructure of his lands, building roads and fortresses, while modernizing his army to be able to go toe-to-toe with the best phalanxes the Greek world had to offer. Thucydides, the famous historian of the Peloponnesian War, praised the reign of his Macedonian contemporary, claiming Archelaus surpassed the achievements of all 8 kings who came before him. It was under Archelaus that the so-called Greekification of Macedon really got underway, a slow Hellenization that saw the highland kingdom morph into something resembling its southern neighbours, slowly transforming into a more urbanized society. Archelaus most likely orchestrated the construction of Pella. The city quickly grew to become a hub of international trade, boasting a massive agora that featured exotic products flowing in from both east and west. Archelaus's royal palace was designed with a distinctly Greek style. One source claims that he invited Zeuxis, the greatest painter in the Hellenic world, to decorate his royal courtroom with a mural of Pan, the god of the wild. Other artists were also brought in to enrich the Macedonian cultural fabric, the most famous example being Euripides, one of Athens' most famous playwrights. The poet spent his last years in Macedon, writing plays about the king and his ancient ancestors that were performed in the lavish Athenian-style theatres of Pella. In 399 BC, Archelaus died while on a hunt, possibly because of a jealous conspiracy born of a homosexual love affair he had with a page in his court. His death resulted in a 6-year interregnum, as his kingdom was torn apart by different claimants to the throne.
Yeah, as we know, like with the Greek and Macedonian politics, constantly a lot of assassinations, conspiracies, killing each other. Like Macedonian court life was actually like a complete like mess, and I would actually be super afraid of it, you know. But yeah, Archelaus was interesting because you kind of see, you know, how, like, obviously great ruler, by the way, I just need to say, great ruler, but you kind of see culturally how Macedon is rising to be not only an equal to the rest of the Greeks in terms of military, in terms of culture and appearance, just like, you're seeing them morph into, you know, exactly like the Greeks, showing themselves of equal standing. And I just really like seeing that evolution, you know. I find it super interesting.
This hiccup was tenuously ended by the ascension of Amyntas III, whose reign was still plagued by constant war, first with the Dardani Illyrians, who took advantage of the instability of Macedon to launch a massive invasion, and later with the Chalcidian League to the south. Nevertheless, Macedon managed to come out on top of both of these conflicts, and now the reigning king, Alexander II, no, still not that one, pressed his kingdom's advantage by launching an invasion into Thessaly. This was foiled by Theban intervention, and Alexander was forced to send his younger brother, Philip, as a hostage to Thebes. Yes, that Philip.
Wow.
The young Philip would learn well during his time in Thebes, but when he returned to Macedon to claim the throne in 364 BC, no one could have predicted that it would be he who would expand the borders of his highland kingdom beyond anything anyone ever imagined. Nor could they have foreseen that it would be his son, Alexander III, yes, that Alexander, who would forever cement Macedonia as one of the most famous kingdoms in world history. The ancient Greeks, proud in their democratic traditions, could never have foreseen that one day they would all owe their allegiance not only to a king, but to a Macedonian king. However, to those of us paying it,
yeah, as we see, the Macedonians, who were of little, like, of low regard to the rest of the Greek world, really one of the coolest, like, underdog stories of all time, rose to become the main Greek force and unite Greece, you know? So that's just amazing, man. That really is just super cool. And we're gonna be watching the 2 Philip videos next, you know, which will be coming out in the next 2 days, obviously. Tomorrow, the diplomatic genius of Philip, and afterwards. So it's gonna be cool to see how much, learning more about Philip, because, you know, some people have said, yeah, he's the one who revolutionized the Macedonian army, you know, creating the Macedonian phalanx, which outdid the traditional Greek phalanx, and, you know, making Macedonia the power it is, giving that the army that it had, that Alexander eventually inherited. And, you know, some people I've seen trying to discredit Alexander is like, well, we really owe it all to Philip, not Alexander, for, you know, the military prowess of the Macedonians. I would say both, personally. I don't want to discredit Alexander. I know, like I said, some forums I've been on, some people are like quick to dismiss Alexander and be like, no, it's really Philip. I don't know, I think it's a bit of both. Alexander, obviously, yeah, did he inherit a great army? Sure, but I don't think that should take away from what he accomplished in terms of tactics and strategy. But, you know, either way. I think they both deserve their due.
Tension, the conquests of Philip and Alexander are anything but surprising, for their ancestors had long before them forged a land of shrewd monarchs and hardy people, whose ability to assert themselves politically, economically, and militarily against the powerhouses of the ancient world was second to none. We will talk about the Greek world more in our future videos, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed.
And I'm looking forward to that. I'll see you guys tomorrow when we start talking about Philip II. Bye everyone.